I'm a little bit, if you actually were to look at my login on some of the network stuff at SchoolLogic, you'd see support analyst and you would see product evangelist. And today you're going to hear a little bit of the product evangelist side, I think. This is the last of our series of the winter webinars. And today we're going to discuss, and I mean that literally toward the end, I've muted you guys right now, but I will unmute when we get to the end of this, and believe me, I will have you out of here in well under an hour. Today is not going to be a real long session. We'll unmute later. We'll talk. We'll have a little free for all maybe later, but we'll keep you guys muted for right now because the audio quality really is a lot better. As usual, we are recording this session today. This presentation will be posted on the internet over the weekend, and you can link to it from our community pages. You see the address right here, community.schoollogic.com. Now, unlike all the other installments in the winter webinar series, today we are going to include a little open forum at the end. After we get done touring this part of SchoolLogic, I'm going to throw this open to discussion, and I'm hoping that all of you all, that's a Texas phrase, all of you all, will share how you are now using activities or how you plan to, and I'm hoping that we can learn from each other. And I think to preserve audio quality, it's best if I keep my mute on now, and we'll worry about opening that up a little bit later. But this is the final one of our winter webinar series, and remember, we started this series in the dead of winter, in the deep snow. And I'm sure you remember this part of the winter when fans from both sides of the 49th parallel stopped to watch hockey. During the winter games, our employees did actually watch the U.S.-Canadian men's hockey game at work. And we continued the webinar series through St. Patrick's Day, which was just last month. Now that's granddaughter Evelyn there. She was born on February 11, celebrating in her shamrock dress. She did hit the milk pretty good on March 17. I won't lie to you. On the other hand, I probably would be lying to you if I told you that my lawn currently looks this lush and green. This might have been taken last July. That's my ever-lovely wife there at the left. The truth is, our world looks a lot more like this these days. I am one of the remote employees. I actually live and work in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and I can tell you that the ice is leaving the Bay of Green Bay. And unless you're one of those who enjoys that fishing through a hole in the frozen water business, I hope the ice is receding where you're living too. History tells us that summer days are coming. You watch. They'll get here. But before you get distracted by open water and gentle warm breezes, before I lose your attention on this Thursday, and like I said, I promise to have you out of here in under an hour. But I want to discuss with you an underutilized part of SchoolLogic called activities. You go to the discipline events menu, right, and you choose activities, and what you do after that is largely up to you. Because unlike something like Create Next Year or Semester End Update, we've built activities as kind of an open-ended feature. You get to flesh it out. Now, broadly speaking, in my humble opinion, you might think about approaching activities in one of two general ways, which I've illustrated in this screenshot. But before I really dive in there, let's back the bus up a minute and look at the actual SchoolLogic Owner's Manual to get us a little idea of what development may have been thinking about when development gave us this stuff. So, SchoolLogic addresses the need for schools to record and maintain information regarding students and the events that occur within school-supervised activities. The Discipline and Events menu will keep track of correspondence, attendance letters, suspensions, discipline incidents, and miscellaneous comments. It can also be used to track conferences with counselors, disciplinary meetings, and so on. Specifically, activities are those occurrences that you need to record, usually for attendance purposes and letters to parents, such as maybe assemblies or field trips or sports tournaments. So, that was kind of the thought in the beginning. Now, you see in there the word suspension and you see discipline in there, and that was all fine. Now, here's my personal take, not necessarily endorsed by my developers or my managers, but my question would be this. with all of the entry and detail that's possible in today's discipline incident area, remember we updated discipline incident 2-3 years ago, and now you can have multiple offenders, multiple victims, multiple discipline actions, all from one single offense. Well, with all that, I have to wonder why you would also want to use this part of the package for more discipline. Now, let's dive a little bit further and look at 3 different examples, not necessarily mutually exclusive examples, of how you might put activities to work for you. We'll come back to the shot I had up before. Now let's start by taking a quick look at these 2 slides. First of all, like I said, if you remember nothing else about today, you will remember that activities is totally up to you. You get to decide how to use it and what you're going to track. Now the cornerstone of this is a field that you see on the left in these examples called type. At least when you go to the discipline events menu and you choose activities, it's called type. This is actually a lookup table in SchoolLogic called correspondence type. And just by that name, you can tell the developers originally were thinking of you communicating with your parents. Okay. Now, let's see how this might play itself out in the top example. Okay. Now, in the top example, my types are things like meeting with parent, telephone, letter. Okay. I suppose you could think of this maybe as discipline incident light, like light beer. Maybe you're in elementary, and you don't need to create big, hairy discipline incidents with all sorts of details and enough information to forward to your local district attorney. Because believe me, I have high schools that do that. They crank those records out, and they literally forward some of the discipline records from SchoolLogic to their police agencies. Well, what if you're in elementary and you don't need all that? Now let's see what we got here. We've got meeting with parent, we've got telephone, we've got letter. That kind of implies maybe a ratcheting up of steps, right? Now I should tell you that even here in activities, there is a free-form area for you to enter text information, not just pick from the drop-down menus, okay? We'll look a little bit later at all the components of activities, and I feel like that's the heart of what we're going to do today, because I need to give you a little guided tour of the components in order for you to make intelligent choices about what ways you might want to use activities. Now, I talked a minute ago about kind of a series of steps here, like we're kind of, first we send a letter home on 3/7, then we end up telephoning the parent a few days later, and then a couple weeks later we meet with the parent. Well, most schools have a series of steps, right? You got a little book, little game plan you follow. So this might be how this school is using activities. Now on the bottom, we see what I would humbly call a more interesting use of activities. Here we see a district which chose to record co-curricular activities in this area. And we see bass fishing, and we see chess team, and we see Illinois State Scholar, which I'm going to guess is some kind of state award. And then we've got something called 4 semester honors on the bottom. I'm going to guess that's some kind of local award. So what we see here is a combination of award type listings and participation type listings, like chess team. Now I took this screenshot from one of our bigger clients, and the astute among you who pay attention to my examples will deduce that this is an Illinois client, and you'd be right. That client has no fewer than 148 entries on their correspondence type lookup table. They seem to track academic awards, drama and music participation in awards, things like DECA, student government, POM and cheer. I saw a student trainer. I saw athletic teams. The most interesting entries of the 148 to me personally were robotics team and robotics BattleBots team. Now, who knows? If some of those participants go into computer programming, they could be designing future versions of SchoolLogic. And here's a third example of how activities might be used. This display looks a little odd to you because you're used to seeing this all in one horizontal line. What I did was I cut the display in half and blew it up so it'd be big enough for you guys to actually see. Now, here, the type is not so amazing. Okay, so somebody in there correspondence type table, they obviously have created an entry called meeting with student. But to me, the interesting part here is the subject. Okay. Now, subject, we see here that I'm going to guess the guidance counselors in the district are using this. And the guidance counselors have a series of planned meetings with the students. So this college prep meeting 1, prep meeting 2, and prep meeting 3. Now, the details of those might look something like this. Activity reports come in about 3 flavors, and this is one of them. This is the detailed report, and we'll certainly show you the others before you leave today. But this detailed report shows you a couple things. It shows you this free-form text area, okay? So we see here that on the first meeting on January 3, right, they discussed Anna's interests. Here's my student, Anna Allen, and they discussed Anna's interests and possible majors. Now, in a perfect world, of course, Anna went home and she discussed some of those possibilities with her parents. Then on February 7, Anna again met with the counselor, who, by the way, is the person we assume are entering the records, right? Now, this is in my pretend data, and so the author just says admin, but this could very well be the counselor's login, you know, as opposed to mine. So you would have then a ledger of which staff member is meeting with which student. That's nice. And in this second meeting, they discussed possible in-state colleges that would offer these majors. And then on March 7, the third meeting, right, we see that Anna and the counselor discussed FAFSA. Now, for those of you whose national symbol is a beaver, I'll explain to you guys that FAFSA is the United States government's first step toward possible college financial aid. Every college-bound family on my side of the border fills out FAFSA. Okay, so on this particular report, the way they've got things constructed in their world, this is a series of meetings, and what's important here is not so much the type, but the subject in their particular world, the way they set that up. So, activities could be related to discipline, could be related to awards, could be related to participation, could be related to some kind of student-staff interaction, or activities could be co-mingling. Now, let me explain what I mean by the bottom one, co-mingling. Because if you've ever chaperoned a high school dance, co-mingling is what the principal told you were there to prevent. Well, because we want the young ladies lined up on one side of the gym and the young men on the other side of the gym, right? In today's context, by co-mingling, I mean, what's to say you couldn't use activities to track a combination of items? When you run these reports, see, you get to filter by that event type, which is really what? It's really the contents of your correspondence type lookup table. So what's to say you might not set up your lookup table with a co-mingling of intentions? Perhaps you store your participation and achievement information and something like that series of college prep meetings I showed you. You could choose to report on only one of those areas when you run the reports. Now, guidance counselors would report on event types which relate to their piece of the puzzle, and secretaries who worry about participation and achievement, they'd run reports looking only for their items. This same kind of commingling would occur if one of your buildings wanted to keep some very simple discipline type of information, while another building might track participation and awards. Each person running reports would see only their own building's information. And remember, the cornerstone of this area of our software is that lookup table called correspondence types. And remember that a lookup table can be set up one of two ways. You can make it district-owned, or you can make it school-owned. Let's just jump out here and look at that real quick. Let's go do this. You'd like to keep the logins active because I obviously started this like 5 minutes before I joined you guys on the phone, but these things time out if you log in too soon up front. So if I go to Setup and I go to Lookup Tables, in fact, let's let's make this even more interesting. Let's go in this database. We only have 2 databases to fool around with today that we have set up for this. But let's go look up lookup tables here. And we said it was correspondence type, right? Okay. So first thing we see is that this is in fact district owned. Okay. So even though I'm logged in as Buffalo Trax High School, see, because I am logged in as the high school, I don't get an edit choice. Okay. This is district owned. I am a school user. I don't get to change this ownership, and I don't get to add to these, right? There's no guy here that says add lookup value. And this is, by the way, that district that's got 148 items. The district has been run through our little confusion device. That's not really what the programmers call it, but believe me, Buffalo Trax is not the real name of their high school. But this is, they got 148 items, yes indeed. Now, a lot of times when we suggest to clients that you should have your lookup table be district owned, we suggest that because the alternative, school owned, often results in multiple versions of the same entry and other data management issues. Now, by my personal raising and my personality type, I almost always favor local control, which would seem in this case to translate into school owned. But look, as a tech person, I see the advantages to district owned because then things like lookup table entries don't seem to spiral out of control so easily. On the other hand, if your district is like this one, which has 148 entries, having this district owned means that operators at every school have to pick through a drop-down list of 148 items. Now, give my screen a second to refresh here after that comes up, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Because remember, one of the things I said, if you made this school-owned, you could have some schools doing one thing and you could have some schools doing another. Yep, that's true. Now, when I come in here to activities, and it doesn't matter which of my buildings I'm at, because this is a district list. Everybody in the district gets the same thing. Check this out. When I say add, I'm going to pick through 148 items on this list. The alternative to that is if I have a school-owned correspondence type, then I'm only going to pick through my own school items. So there's pluses and minuses with everything, and I just wanted to show you both sides of where that works. If you make that a school-owned table, each school would see only its entries in the lookup table. So what I've just done is I've led you into your first decision about how you're going to set this up. Very, very basic question up front. Do we want the lookup table to be school-owned, or do we want it to be district-owned? So, how do activities work? Well, I would urge you up front, you need to plan how you're going to use it. And you need to plan who will use it. Then we got to think about security for the staff that's going to set it up. In other words, who's going to set up that lookup table? By the way, you'll hear this again later in the presentation, but really in the software, the only upfront data entry that has to happen is that correspondence type lookup table. But we've got to allow security for that for, probably a small number of people that you'd want setting that up. You got to think about security for the staff who are going to actually enter the records. Probably want RMD for the menu item called activities. Now, if they're going to enter and edit the stuff, yeah, just give them all 3 RMD. Security for the staff reporting. In a bigger operation, you may not have the same people running reports as you have entering the records. There is, by the way, a separate menu item for activity reporting. So you could, for instance, keep a security, from a security standpoint, you could prevent staff from doing either entering or reporting. You could prevent them from doing either of those. You could allow them to do both of those. Now, like I said a second ago, you really only have to enter setup data in one spot, and that's in that lookup table called correspondence type. Okay. How do we really do this? Let's quickly go in here and show you how we really do this. So Step number one is we're going to go back to our smaller database, and we're going to go to correspondence type. And I am now a district user, so when I come in here, when my software catches up with me, beautiful. See, I'm a district user. This is district owned. That's why I can add lookup values if I want to. And I can also edit the fact that this is district owned or school owned. Okay? And the reason I had these choices and the other operator didn't is because in this database, I am a district user. And you guys know how to add to lookup tables, right? You click add lookup value. You log in as a district person first. You click add lookup value, and you're off to the races. Okay? Now, notice on this one, this is maybe what I'm going to call a combination, maybe what I would have called earlier commingling. We've got some people that seem to be interested in meetings, and then you could still have, and you know, here's when I say interested in meetings, I really should have said interested in discipline. The potential, you know, here's my step one, I send a letter. Step two, I phone. Step three, I meet with a parent. Okay? And then meanwhile, in that same database, I've got my guidance counselors having meetings with students. And obviously meeting with a student could be a discipline thing too. So a lot of choices. Now, besides the security setup that we discussed briefly on the previous slide, this is the only setup you need to do in the software, which, of course, is not the same thing as saying it's the only setup you need to do before you start recording activities. As we discussed about 2 slides ago, you need to set up front how you wish to use these, who you wish to have handling them, and more concretely now, how are you going to use subject? Let's go find my friend Anna Allen. Anna is the young lady who has been meeting with a counselor all those times. I'm going to bring her up here in just a second. Now, when we notice that Anna had the same type of event the whole time, right? From this drop-down menu, they kept picking meet with student. Then what they did was they used the subject line to differentiate those meetings, okay? Subject is not something you set up in advance in the software like you set up correspondence type. Correspondence type, as you see here, drop down. Subject, manually entered, okay? So if you are going to propose a use of activities like this, you are going to want to set up a series of what should the subject be. You are going to want to mandate that. Because if you don't, your operators will be willy-nilly here, and then subject that'll make or break using subject. It'll make or break how this sets up on the reports. Okay? Now, check this out. I'm going to go run my little report here. And the first thing I want to do is make sure I only get Anna. I do not want 62 of her classmates. I want just Anna. And I'm going to ask only for meeting with student. And we'll look at this a little more later. I just wanted to show you kind of quickly here how nicely this sets up when you're organized about how you use subject. That type, he flowed in from correspondence type, and that subject, the people manually entered. But they manually entered it in an organized way, and it looks pretty nice. Look how nice this report sets up. Now, I can't sort this by subject in the reporting choices, but because I am tracking this progressive chain of college prep meetings, which always occur in order, it looks like I've arranged the report by subject. The truth is, it's sorted by date. The stock detailed report, which is what this is, the developers did not give us the ability to sort by anything at all to do with the activity. I can only sort the order in which the students appear, okay? So when I run this report, if I have 20 kids, I get to sort which kids are where, but within a given student, it's going to be organized by date. So this is an example of the detailed activity report by student, and it illustrates quite nicely, in my opinion, that the subject you choose is probably the second most important part of this after type. We should also notice this text element here. Okay, now let's go see where that came from. When I create a new activity, which is kind of what you've been itching to watch me do here. When I create a new activity, I'm going to pick, first of all, my activity type. I'm going to say, okay, I'm having a meeting with a student. The date comes in for you. Let's bring this down in the middle. You can see it better. The date comes in for you, or of course you can click on this little guy and pick a different date. That's particularly nice to have, by the way, if you've got a whole stack of these. Maybe people are doing paper reports, and then one of your favorite secretaries has to enter these into the computer. The ability to sort of pick a different date is pretty nice. Permanent. Permanent does what you probably think it is. There's some other parts of our software that work this way as well. If you say yes to permanent, this item will stay with the kid year after year after year. So if you were maybe in elementary and you were working on that discipline light concept, simple issues that your elementary staff wishes to deal with, you want the ability to store, you want the ability to look back, you could use this. You'd probably mark this as no, which would mean that when you do the demographic rollover in the summer, this record gets deleted. Okay? Now, this text guy, you can be as descriptive as you want. Okay? So text is a free form area to enter the event. Okay? Now, suppose at the same district, your middle schools and high schools say, you know what, we're going to use quote-unquote real discipline, what I call discipline and incidents, right? But we want to track co-curricular participation. Well, fine and good. The elementary operators would only see activity types relating to their discipline needs, and the middle and high school operators don't see those. They see only their co-curricular codes. Now, something like that might work. And then you've got maybe the middle school and high school marking permanent as yes, so they can keep those activities from year to year. And then, you know what, when the kid graduates, they can produce a nice report that shows his or her co-curricular participation and awards in date order over their entire career. That's kind of cool. Okay, I digress. Let's go back and finish looking at the elements of the activity record. We picked type from the drop-down, right? The date created was added for us, or we picked it. Like discipline records in our software, permanent means, do I want this record to follow the student beyond this school year? If yes, mark it permanent. By the way, if you change your mind later, yes, you can change this, either in an individual record or you can change them wholesale out in SQL. You've got to have your sleeves rolled up to do that. Private also works like discipline. It allows me to control which staff members can see this record. Watch this. If I change this to yes, and then I click on users, now I can control which of my operators see this, or which of my operators not only see it, they can edit it. So that's kind of cool. Let's go back to no here because I like the white space. Above that, now we have subject. We talked a little earlier that this can be important, so I would urge you to give some thought to this. You can't truly sort a report by this, either here or over in user-defined reports. But subject can still be important. By the way, right now today, subject hasn't been added yet to user-defined reports. See? We'll build that out a little later. Now, let's go look at Buffalo Tracks for a second. Buffalo Tracks is here. Okay. Let's show you their first 6 kids. Let's do this. Okay, I said I'd have you guys out here by well under an hour. I'm at 12:31, and we're now showing you reports. This is like the last part of this. We don't really want Hank. But the reports are important because once you know kind of what the reports look like, it helps drive your other decisions about how are you really going to use this. Okay, so I selected my top 6 girls. Now, I got, like I said, 148 items here. We happen to know that girls golf is what all of these ladies are involved in. So, boom, I'm only going to pick girls golf. Start date, end date, does what you think. If you go ahead and say, I just want to know what's going on in 2014, you could pick that as a start date, as an end date. This works the way you think it does, brings up the calendar. Okay. Don't worry about subject. We haven't quite built that out yet. It's a very nice piece of real estate here, but you can fill things in here, and it doesn't really matter on the reports. Private correspondence, down here. Remember, I had that ability to say this is private. If I do that and I say this, then I don't see it. Okay? So most people, most of the time, are going to go for include. Standard stuff here, standard stuff on sorting. By this, we mean the report entries. Okay? So if I sort by student name, I am probably running one of these reports by kid. If I sort by date created, I may very well be running a report not by kid, but perhaps by type. Just saying. Format, pretty basic stuff here. We'll stick with PDF. And then schedule, do I want to do this report later in the day? No, I really don't. I want to do it now. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. We're going to pick by student, and we'll show you as we go along here the differences. By student, we said girls golf. Here are my kids. And this is pretty much a roster. You get details about the student, but only details in the header that you see here. Okay, so in other words, if it's not in this header, you don't get to see it. I got 4 kids. No, I got 3 kids. Okay, great. Now, let's go by type instead of by student. Simply a list. It's just a counter. How many kids do I have? I have 3 kids. Okay, so I could go by type, and I could get really quickly how many kids are involved in each of my 148 activities if I picked all 148 of them. Now, the detailed reports, which I think you might like a little better, let's go by type, and I say detailed, and this looks exactly like the other student report we had. By type, here's detailed information. Okay? As opposed to summary information, I would have just got 3. Here I know. And occurrences looks a little funny over here because, remember, the developers kind of expected us to maybe be using this with discipline. So then something like meeting with student showing up in here, how many times did we meet with a student? By student, detailed. Now, this is truly by student. Here's all the details about that. I got my text entries. I've got my type. Remember that came from the drop-down. My subject. Now I'm, again, remember I said you want to think about how you're going to use subject. Because in girls golf, that makes a fair amount of sense. I could be junior varsity or I could be varsity. Okay? By the way, tell your operators to spell the word the same way. In this case, one's capitalized, one's not. Okay, Hank, I'm guessing, probably didn't quite make a good thing there. And then down here, here's sort of my summary, girls golf. Okay, now how did I do that? I said detailed report. I said by student. You get the details of the activity records by student. You got your varsity JV. Why? Because those are differences in subject. Notice I couldn't sort by that. Okay, this is the 4th report you've seen me run. It's the only one that actually includes the subject. So this is why I urge you to plan and test before you implement how you use activities. In this case, if it's important to you to know whether the kid is JV versus varsity, you might want to put that in your correspondence type, right? So that the type would be girls JV golf, girls varsity golf. Don't leave it to the subject to differentiate unless you always run this particular report. Okay? So that's kind of it. I mean, that's kind of, I've showed you activities. So what have we learned in the last 36 minutes? We've learned that activities can be used in a variety of ways, even within a single district or board. Activities could be related to discipline. They might be related to communication. They might be related to awards or participation. Activities can be related to some sort of student-staff interaction. And when you go to report on them, and those built-in reports are really the best of our, they just are in this particular case for activities. You're going to say, okay, broadly speaking, am I going to report by student or am I going to report by type? And, I would urge you to consider how I want to set that up. Do I want to be building owned? Do I want to be district owned at the correspondence type level? What sorts of things am I going to track with that lookup value called correspondence type? How am I going to use the subject? And all of that comes, is the front end. But in order to make the front end decisions, you have to play with it a little bit on the back end to see how the reports run. Because really, having all this information in SchoolLogic is kind of only important to you in terms of how are you going to get it out. How am I going to report on that? And, who in my district cares about this, who's going to be able to use it, that whole sorts of things. And what I'm doing right now, ladies and gentlemen, is I'm unmuting you guys. Because I actually have a little control that lets me do that. And I'm just about done. Okay, so as far as I can tell now, every one of you guys have a live telephone connection. You guys are live. And I just wanted to have a little forum here at the end to see how you guys are using activities now, okay, let me ask that first. There's 13 of you guys here in our meeting today. Are you guys using activities now?
Our high school uses it, and one of our elementary schools is interested.
And how does your high school use it?
Very similarly, but more related to discipline, and I think it would be great to show them how they could use it in their career counselor office to track some of those meetings for post-secondary planning.
And by the way, in the last 10 days, I totally made that up, okay? We don't have a manual or something somewhere that says, hey, here's a way you could use this. You could use it in the career planning. But I happen to have a couple of daughters that are in their early 20s that didn't go to high school so long ago. And in our particular high school in Green Bay, I didn't think they were particularly organized in terms of career planning. And I just made that up in the last 10 days. And, I've demoed this, what you guys have just seen, I demoed within our staff before I brought it out to you folks. And it made some sense to some other people, too, this idea that you could track a series of meetings. So one of the things about activities is that it's open-ended. I mean, you could have 2 meetings or you could have 100 meetings. You could just keep adding them. What do you think your grade school wants to do with it?
Our grade school has quite a few different uses because they're almost like an inner. So they have a lot of family interaction with their family liaison at the school, and I think they want to track it more that way so that they can help families in need.
Cool. So you might want to give some thought to having correspondence type be school-owned. How many buildings do you have in your district or board?
6.
6. Okay. So 6 wouldn't be killer. See, once you go to school-owned, if you had the same code, let's pretend you had 3 elementaries, and each of the 3 elementaries wants to track these interactions with the parent. Well, that means that you're going to have 3 different codes that say parent meeting. When you're district-owned, you'd only need the one code, and then everybody sees it. But if you've got a high school that says, no, we want this whole series of discipline steps, the elementaries say, we're not going to use those. Every time we enter a record, we don't want to have to go through all of the high school codes to get to our codes. That's kind of what leads to that. Okay, let's have correspondence type be school-owned. And I said sixes and killer, and by that I meant, okay, if you had one high school and you had 5 other schools, you'd have to have 5 meet with parents. Okay. I mean, that's not terrible. It's not like you have 28 buildings. You have 28 buildings. Gosh, then it's pretty hard to go with school-owned, because all of a sudden you need 28 codes that say meet with parents. Man, that's, you know, again, now each school only sees their own, which is nice, but somebody at the district level is sitting there going, how come we have 28 codes that say meet with parents? Well, because we have 28 buildings, that's why. And I would suspect that this might be one of those pieces of the software that you might not bring all of your buildings into the fold at once. You might have some administrators in some buildings that see the value in this, and you might have other administrators that are going, no, don't get it, don't want it. Who else do we have out there that's using activities now, and how are you using it? Are there questions that I might be able to answer before we leave?
Yes. Will subject ever become a lookup table type field where we can kind of enter, you know, much like the type, where we could then put certain options for them to choose from?
I think that'd be a great idea. I think somebody like you needs to send me an enhancement request so I could go bother development with that. I think that'd be a great idea. Because that would help flesh this out a lot, I think. I got to be careful. We actually have three or four of our staff members that are part of this meeting today. I got to be careful what I say in front of them. But we don't have anybody here from development today to defend themselves, and we can't all jump on development. They made this 4 or 5 years ago, probably more than that. And I think, like you saw originally in that first slide I put up, when they created this, they were thinking about discipline. And since then, I'm going to myself, hey, if there's all these discipline incidents, there's all that data that you can collect over there, maybe you could come up with a creative way to use activities. Let's track participation. So I'm going to go back and mute you guys. I got a couple more slides to show you, and then we're out of here. The thing that happens when you guys are not muted is I get big feedback and I echo, and it's kind of difficult to do the presentation. But hey, I really do appreciate you guys coming out today. This whole series of winter webinars has been really well attended. You guys have reacted very positively to that. I personally appreciate that very much. This is like the most fun part of what I do at SchoolLogic, so I appreciate you guys responding to that, and I hope that we've spread some knowledge, and it's something like activities. Now I've got you guys thinking, and you guys can ask some questions and think about how you want to do this. So that's pretty much it. All of us have survived the inaugural winter webinar series, and the day is approaching faster in some locales than others, that we're going to be able to relax in summer clothes like these, surrounded by warm, or at least non-frozen water. And now I just want to issue one more business reminder before we all take off. If you have colleagues who couldn't attend today, or if you want to review this online yourself, or maybe you want to sit down with that administrator and let them see this, or you could just schedule, by the way, if you have an administrator that you want to, like, show some of this stuff to, it's not impossible for the three of us to spend a go-to meeting someplace, take an hour time someplace, and I won't show them the whole presentation I just gave here, but we could show them parts of it and then, take some questions live. That's always cool. But if you want to review this entire presentation, you know the address, community.schoollogic.com. Give me over the weekend to put it up there, and I promise you I will. Hey, thanks for coming today. I hope you found this helpful. I hope you have a terrific afternoon. I hope you have a terrific spring. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.